Yeah. I think so.
Yeah, I want to go forward.
And just member Freeman is on. Okay. We're all set.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our third public hearing this evening. We are at Nathan Bishop Middle School for the ward boundary redistricting committee.
We do something about that sound.
We're trying.
Leave it the lights.
We are trying.
Ben, there's a really big buzz in the auditorium. You hear that?
No.
I don't like it. It's coming straight through the PA, Vicky.
I'm not gonna record this.
Yeah, can we put the PA up and speak loudly? Will that work?
Ziggy,
Oh,
There you go. We are all
that
set now.
works.
thank you. Okay, I'm going to
I use
project
anyone.
loudly. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah. Makes so much difference.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to recognize we have former city councilor and current state senator Sandra in the room. We also have Councilor Helen Anthony with us this evening. Tonight we have our committee members, Councilor Rachel Miller and Councilor Mary Kay Harris are with us, and Member Freeman is with us via Zoom. We also have our consultant, Ryan Taylor is joining us this evening, and he will give us a presentation later. Madam Clerk, if you're ready to proceed.
We are.
Great. Thank you. The first presentation will be this blue redistricting Providence presentation. You should have gotten a copy. If not, there are copies in the lobby. We apologize this evening. We'll be using copies as the projector isn't working at the moment. So tonight's agenda is as follows. We'll go over a brief overview of the history of boundaries in the city and the criteria which bring us together tonight to redo these wards. We'll then have a short presentation from Election Data Services about the different state boundaries and the challenges and sort of opportunities those pose for us. And then we'll have time for public testimony, which is limited to 3 minutes per person. There was a sign up in the lobby, but if you haven't signed up and you'd like to speak, there should be time for you to do so. So please let us know. I'll call on that later. Would any of my fellow community members like to say anything?
Yeah,
Of course.
Thank you, Chairwoman. So I would just say this is the first time, to my knowledge, in the city of Providence that we've had a non-elected person lead the committee and also serve on the committee. He's makes 3 minutes here on Zoom. And I just want to, I'm thrilled about that for a variety of reasons, but first and foremost, I just want to thank her because she's been working really hard at ensuring that this is a transparent and accountable process, and that is the forefront. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay. Well, I recognize many of you, you've been to our meetings before, and I want to thank you for continuing this process with us. But for some of the folks who haven't been with us before, why we're here tonight is because we're in the process of redistricting our city's ward boundaries. And what that means is we are redrawing our political district boundaries. We have to do this every decade because we want to make sure that there's equal representation across the city. And as we know, we just had the last census in 2020, and that census showed that Providence has changed. Our population grew, population moved to different parts of the city. And so in order for there to be equal representation in each ward, we have to redraw the boundaries to make sure that we get as equal as population as possible in each of those wards. And it's not just us that does this. We know that the state is doing this, and we know that cities across the state are doing this, and also across the country this is happening. And so how the process works in Rhode Island is that the state starts its redistricting process first. They redraw the congressional boundaries, so the 2 different congressional seats that we have in the city, or in the state, sorry. And then also each of the House districts into the Senate districts. And then once that's done, cities and towns across the state redraw their boundaries. I'd like to thank you, Rep. Kislak, for joining us this evening. Okay, so thank you, Councilor Miller, for highlighting the fact that this is the first time that we've had public members, not just elected officials, on the committee. On this slide, the Providence Ward Committee Basics, I'll talk a little bit about our home rule charter, which outlines the reasons why we're coming together and outlines sort of how we should work together when we do have this committee. The home rule charter stipulates that we should have 15 ward boundaries, that they're to be redrawn using the basic census data, and that it's led by a 5-member committee. So that's actually in the charter. We have several requirements that we are to have at least 4 public hearings. We are to submit a report that includes sort of reasons and rationale for why we redrew the boundaries the way we did and the things that we used to redraw them. And then all of our hearings and meetings must abide by the Open Meetings Act, meaning we post it at a specific time, make the agendas public. We actually have all of our hearings that have happened to date on our website. We also have upcoming agendas and hearings on our website. If you go to the Secretary of State's Open Meetings Act, you can see all of our agendas and our meetings there already listed. We've also posted all of those things. All of the links are available there. You can actually also sign up to get an email whenever there's a change to that. So whenever a new meeting is posted, you can get it, and you'll get an email, and the most updated information will be sent right to you. Our charter also outlines the criteria that we must use when we're redrawing the boundaries. So as I said, equality of population, that's one of the 6 criteria that we must use when we are redrawing the boundaries. Then the charter says that we should have our boundaries be contiguous as much as possible, which is all parts of the district are in physical contact, so we don't have these islands of districts. Everything is in contact with each other. Our ward should comply with the Voting Rights Act, which means we can't discriminate against people's right to vote. We should consider communities of interest when we draw the boundaries. So that's why we've been having these public hearings, to get input on what people want to see kept whole in their neighborhoods and their communities when we redraw these boundaries. Our ward should be geographical compact, meaning that they should be fairly regular shape and all the constituents should live near one another. And then finally, the last criteria that we must use when we're redrawing these boundaries is that we cannot consider any incumbent or political candidate's home address when we're redrawing the boundaries. So the next couple of slides are the former maps, and I just thought it would be really interesting to see how lines have sort of shifted over time. I'm going to run through it very quickly, but the first map is from 1992. So these were the wards as of 1992. And then on the next page, the 1992 maps remain in black, and then the 2002 boundaries are in blue. So you can see there was some slight change. For example, Ward 2 on the top right-hand side of the city, the line sort of shifts to the left from the black line shifts to the blue line, and that's the new Ward 2 boundary. So then the next map is just 202 by itself. That was about 20 years ago. And then last decade, you can see then on this, the following page, is the orange lines are now the 2012 boundaries, which are our current boundaries. You can see Ward 2 again sort of shifted, the orange line shifted to the right there, right at the sort of the center of the J of the district. And then that leads us to today's current boundaries, which we're discussing. Right. Okay. So finally, I just wanted to let everyone know that we still have several upcoming meetings and hearings. This Thursday, we have a committee hearing meeting, which will be a hybrid meeting. Yes. And that is on our Secretary of State open meeting page. We also on Monday have another public hearing at the Da Vinci Center in Charles Street. And then Wednesday, March 2nd, we have a remote Zoom hearing again. And we will get the link to you as soon as possible. And then we will also have a sign up, a virtual sign up in case anyone wants to testify. Can you-
Yes, I will put that on the agenda and just ask people to email me their name and phone number to a specific account so that I can connect with them to verify that there's an actual person there.
Great, thank you.
It'll be on the agenda.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And finally, the last page of this is ways in which you can get involved. So there's our email address in case you want to reach out to provide public comment or testimony. As I said, our website has many of our previous hearings posted, so you can go back and watch previous hearings. We have a map that sort of outlines all the different boundaries of the city. We have all of the presentations thus far that we've had. And then again, the YouTube videos. Thank you all. Do you have anything to add, members? No? Great. Thank you. Okay. I'd now like to turn it over to Election Data Services, Ryan Taylor. I'd also like to recognize that Kimball Grace, our other consultant, is on the Zoom. So thank you, Kimball, for also being here this evening. Ryan?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I would just like to note that Susanna Skolnick from the Law Department is on Zoom along with Councilman Gonzalez.
Welcome, Councilman. Thank you.
One technical question. Do I need to unmute my computer or can they just hear me?
No, they can hear
They
you.
can hear me. Okay, great. Okay. Thank you, Chairwoman. That was a great introduction about some of the aspects of this that we need to keep in mind. My name is Ryan Taylor. I work with Kim Brace with Election Data Services, and we are helping with the redistricting and redistricting process. I'm sorry, I'm going to try and project my voice more. We are very happy to be here and with everyone in the team and with all of you in attendance. Thank you so much for coming. We do look forward to hearing all your thoughts about this process at the end. of a quick little presentation about two things. I did change this. I did change the language on the second slide, which is today's discussion. We're going to talk about two things here. One, how has the ward line, how have the wards been affected by change in the city since the last redistricting in 2012? And then how has the state legislative and congressional lines changed in the city that was just recently passed and signed into law by the governor? So I'm going to say, I'll probably say next slide, and then there's a little table of information that discusses some of the numbers that we need to keep in mind. One of the things that we have done in this state is we allocated the prisoners that were in the ACI that are going to be released by April 1st of 2022. They were in there when Census Day took place, April 1st, of 2020. And if they had less than 2 years on their release date, we did take them out of the ACI account and put them back in their communities. So that we're calling that new population post allocation. As you can see, so we had the difference between the pre-allocated numbers and the post. The new target population for each ward will be 12,754. But we don't have to have exactly that number. We do have a window of flexibility here. So the two numbers that we need to have a viable plan is 5% below to 5% over. And you can see those exact figures in the column under post allocation. We are going to be looking to have every ward after redistricting be between 13,392 on the high end or 12,116 on the low end. Citywide population is 191,309, and we get that target population simply by dividing that total number by 15. Okay, I hope everyone has the colored map in front of you. I'll be looking at the next one, which is mostly green. This is the growth in each city ward since the last census. Normally, I have a map of population growth, whereas the growth is in green and population loss is in purple. Well, every ward grew in population over the last 10 years, but that growth was heavily focused in certain areas. Ward 12 gained 29% of its population, and a lot of that we've looked into reasons why. There's been a lot of loft conversions and new construction in the ward, both in the Valley neighborhood and also new development downtown and in College Hill portion of the ward. These buildings were not there 10 years ago, but they have been built and these people moved in, and the ward has had the most growth in the city. There's been also major population growth in Ward 15 and 7 as well, and a little less growth on the east side of Providence, where we are now, and in the South Providence. But every ward has grown in population. The next slide is the deviation map. Just because there's been growth does not mean the fact that there's different focuses of growth means that there is, a disparity between where wards have grown and what needs to happen now. We might have been a little bit underpopulated 10 years ago, and if we didn't have as much growth as another area, they're going to be much smaller than the next ward. When we took that perfect number, population of 12,754, we then compare that to all the wards' population and how they measure up to that ideal pop. We can see in the percent deviation, the wards that are overpopulated are in pink, and the wards that are underpopulated are in grayscale. Not every ward, even if we have that window, and so like the lighter shades of pink or gray by themselves don't need to grow just because of the population in those wards. But wards such as 12 and 15 have too many people, and that means they need to shrink their area so that less population lives in those wards. And so there's not a disparity in the number of constituents per ward. Like I said, 12 and 15 are by themselves too big, and wards 13 and 9 by themselves are too small. So that's gonna be one thing that we need to think about from the very beginning, is how does 13 and 9 expand to get a higher population, and then how do 12 and 15 shrink to get a lower population, so that they don't have that unviable deviation. And some of the other wards, even though I say they're within that window, they might be affected by what we call the ripple effect. So the ripple effect, yeah. Okay, next slide.
No. Sorry, we'll take questions at the end.
Yeah, be happy to. Okay, the next slide, yellow and purple, are the majority race per ward for both 2010 and 2020 census. If a ward is colored dark purple, the majority race in that ward is Hispanic. If a ward is colored dark yellow, the majority race in that ward is non-Hispanic white. If they are not fully colored, then the lines are colored to show what the plurality race is, which means like in wards 10 and 6, we can see that it's not dark purple, but it's at the hash. That means the plurality is Hispanic, which means it's the largest racial group, but not over 50%. And in ward, I'm looking at the 2010 side, and 2010, the wards 4, 12, and 13 had a plurality non-Hispanic white population. That has changed in the last 10 years. We can see Ward 4 has gone from majority non-Hispanic white to majority Hispanic. And Ward 13 has gone from a plurality non-Hispanic white to a majority non-Hispanic white. And then it's been interesting to look at the second largest racial group in each ward, where I state in the text which group that is and what percent of the ward makes up that population. But the important thing is to look at if you have a strong growth in the non-Hispanic, the Hispanic population in South and Western parts of Providence, and growth in the non-Hispanic white population in Ward 13. So that's kind of a breakdown of how the population has changed per ward in the last 10 years. And we will keep all of these things in mind as we go through the redistricting process. The next slide is the outcome of what we did with the states. There are factors that we need to keep in mind when we bring in these new district lines. Rhode Island has a very simple way of establishing a voting district. It is what we call the ballot style. It is the selection of all the district's candidates on the ballot. So such as if you live in Senate District 3 and House District 4 and Ward 3 and Congressional 1, that combination of candidates creates a ballot style. And if the number of constituents that have that ballot style is over 3,000, then you need to take that group and divide it into multiple precincts. If you have under 3,000 eligible voters with that ballot style, a canvassing clerk or a town clerk can decide that becomes a precinct. But this effect shows that we need to keep in mind where the lines are, not just for the wards, but for every other state legislative or congressional line as well. So I'm going to show you where those are on the next slides. They are, the first one is the congressional line. It is kind of snaky, but congressional lines and the Supreme Court has demonstrated that we have to have those extremely equal. We don't have that 10% or 5% plus or minus window on congressional lines. It's best practice to draw those to have the same number of constituents. So that is kind of why it kind of snakes its way through the city. It simply is, that's where we were able to find the exact same population for each congressional district 1 and 2. And Providence is the one city in the state that is split between the two districts. Every other town is wholly within a congressional district. Then the next one is going to be, we're going to show you the state Senate district boundaries. And, you know, as you can see, the east side of Providence is mostly M3. Growth of Providence over the last 10 years, we needed to, a lot of the districts in this city needed to shrink, which brought 15 in on the east side. And so, and then 6 is a lot of the Mount Hope neighborhood. But then those are the state Senate lines. The state house will be the next slide. And we're going to see those on this. All of these are going to be shown together with these colors, so you can kind of see a spaghetti effect. The blue lines are state house districts, and the next slide shows them together. And then, so each of these, you know, if we don't consider the ward, contains a grouping of constituents that have the names on the different group of 3 names in the ballot. But when you have wards, you need to have that ward is a 4th district. And we can see that on the map in the next slide. And these were created in 2012. And we are here to try and go through the redistricting process with the components that I have already discussed. When you look at those lines together on the next slide, so we're all together, you have to keep these in mind. Places where, you know, if you see a block, if you see like a green going down one block and all the rest are going down the other, it's going to be recommended that we do some alignment there, or else the city of these city has to create they're going to be stuck with a pocket precinct, which is has a polling place with a very small number of voters. So this is a system that we have here, and it's what we're keeping in mind as a factor in the redistricting process. But we still have other aspects such as neighborhoods. We don't want to split up neighborhoods if we don't have to. So we are conscious of where those are, and we do hear a lot in the process. But please don't split up my neighborhood. You're taking away our chance to elect a representative from the neighborhood or have our voice strong in the city government. So we do keep those in mind as a factor as well. So we'd like to thank everyone for coming. I hope maybe this has been a useful presentation for you to hear and understand the changes and the factors, some of the factors that are at play. I look forward to hearing from the public testimony and taking some notes. Appreciate it. Thank you very much for having me able to speak here.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That was very helpful to see how all of those layers will be used as a way for us to think about where our new boundaries need to go. When Ryan talks about pocket precincts, just to reiterate that point, is this is where a precinct is your voting, your polling place. You think about that as someplace where you go. So actually, some of us vote here, Nathan Bishop, this is my polling place. What we don't want to do is create an area where a polling place only has 10 to 20 to 30 voters in it. You want to make sure that you create a polling place that is big enough to make sense to have it be a precinct. As we know, it's very expensive to have an election and maintain a polling place, get poll workers, get materials printed. So one of the goals is to make sure that we have as many precincts as we need, but not precincts that are so small. We want them to be a good size. So that's why we like to show the spaghetti maps, because that adds another layer in which we need to pay attention to when we're redrawing our boundaries. So I'd like to thank everyone for their attention. We're going to move to the public testimony portion of the evening. Madam Clerk, the first thing I'd like to do is I did receive one written testimony. I'd like to enter that into the record, please.
So noted, Madam Chair.
Thank you. May I please have the list of who has signed up?
Yes.
And do my fellow committee members have anything to add? Oh, there she is. Yes, we're. Test. All in one. I'd like to recognize, welcome, Councilor LaFortune. Thank you for joining us. So, thank you. As I said at the beginning, each person will have 3 minutes in which to provide testimony. Because we have a small crowd, but I think we have several people who are signed up to talk, please respect that 3 minutes. If you have questions first that we can answer right now, we will. If there are questions that we are unable to answer, we have your email address here and we will get back to you with the answer to those questions at a later time. So the first person I'd like to call is Sharon Steele.
And if you could just stand like right here so that the camera can pick you up, that would be great.
This is the camera.
Sharon, if you could just state your name and address for the record.
So you want me right here?
Yes.
I'm gonna have to juggle a few things here because I thought there might be a podium, but. Sharon Steele, President of the Jewelry District Association. Hello.
Good evening.
Thank you all for allowing public testimony. And I do have a question, but I guess I shall save it.
You can say it to me and then we can see how it.
Okay, so my question is, when you've done the population numbers, they've been done by wards. We, as neighborhood leaders, would like to have those numbers by neighborhoods. So is it possible to generate those numbers like soon?
We will look into that for you.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Okay. It's our understanding that one of the underlying principles of this process is keeping communities of interest together. That said, we'd like to share some history that has served as the basis of how we view our neighborhood. The Jewelry District was born as a gritty manufacturing center to service the jewelry industry, surrounded by a dirty, noisy highway. In 1999, it was considered the unpolished gem of downtown Providence. It had been just 4 years since the association was created, when the founders decided to create a district plan. This reflects how we saw ourselves in 1999. It is a crucial moment for the Jewelry District. This plan presents a conceptual framework leading to the emergence of the district as one of the treasures of downtown Providence. It presents the vision of a place that is alive with the activity of residents and workers in an environment of creativity and innovation. It establishes critical connections to surrounding neighborhoods, and it projects an intensity of new infill development tied to the realities of parking demand that will bring in new residents and businesses. And now the Jewelry District Association, with organization, leadership, and a commitment to partnership from the city, is in a position to take the next steps toward the realization of the future. Fast forward, we are again at a crucial moment for the Jewelry District. We have only just begun to create and curate a brand new neighborhood. Out of the rubble of twisted metal and massive chunks of concrete, our perimeter took shape. We've provided for you our proposed map, which I have sent to Jessica. a triangle with a rounded bottom that is meant to represent the perimeter as it was viewed in 1999 when the highway created our boundaries. Why is that significant? Because it defines what we consider to be our community of interest. We are becoming what we were always meant to be and how we define who we are. We determined in 1999 that we should be a center for innovation and design, and that our residents and investors have come together to breathe new life into this plan. We started to create our brand new neighborhood when we rallied around the design competition in 2006, which chose a winner to design a pedestrian bridge. We knew we needed it to knit back together our neighborhood. And in 2016, we created a nonprofit called Building Bridges Providence, and we began to advocate to finally fund the pedestrian bridge so that we could again access all the restaurants and businesses and institutions that were always part of our hood. And so we have come full circle, and yet we have only just begun. We have delivered the underlying principles of redistricting, that being contiguous, compact, community-oriented, and soon to be, fingers crossed, increased population, which then makes it close to equal. We are keeping our district whole. We are recreating the edges and solidifying the middle as our 1999 plan set out to do. We are on our way to fulfilling our 99 plan, but we need the wisdom and encouragement of the redistricting committee to allow the jewelry district to become the jewel from the unpolished gem it used to be. Thanks.
Thank you.
Just thank the chair who is doing her job in the community and really running a wonderful, transparent. Really appreciate everyone's help with that process. I represent there particular that I'd like to address with the committee, and I have done this in a meeting with Jess and with Ryan individually. The two areas for me have been Patterson Park, which is a small triangle that is bounded by Angel and Southing. It was redistricted, I think, in the last redistricting out of. I did come and address this issue, and I, even though we discuss this in a small meeting, I'd like to discuss it in the community and make sure it's part of the record. This is one of those situations when I found out that this is going to be impossible, because if we were to redistrict it back into Ward 2, it would create a special ballot for a very, very small area. Which is why I think, in my personal opinion, the redistricting should start at the local level and then do the extra layers on top of it, reps, state senators, and congressional districts, because really isn't it the most important thing to keep our neighborhoods together? So I will say that I feel like I've hit a wall on that particular issue because of that very, very, it's actually the rep race, I think, that has that. So in other words, it's Blazajewski instead of second thing I wanted to address was the fact that at Benefit Street, and it's really sort to represent that interest as well as the show. I did come in and speak again about that particular moving the ward line down to North Main Street or down to the river. Again, I I ran into a surprise because I was told by Ryan when I came in to meet that the block, Ryan, you can give me the number on that, as I read, and North Main contains a number of RISD students, which is what number?
1,300
1,300,
or over 10% of a ward.
which is right smack in that small block, so that my numbers are relatively stable as they exist today. So even to try to move it one block and try to incorporate that, I would have to give up something, some other larger area within my ward, which is becoming very problematic. So I'm only saying this because I want to be open and transparent about the conversations that have happened between me and you and the committee. I'm still going to be working on this problem, but I just wanted to make sure that the public knew, and also to just say it to you, and thank you. So I guess it's going to be an ongoing conversation.
Thank you, Councilwoman.
Thank you.
Does anyone need to respond? Madam Clerk, our third speaker is Doug Victor. Doug, would you like, are you prepared to speak? Yes, I'm calling you. Please come.
Please just state your name and address for the record.
So you can see me fine.
Yes.
My name is Doug Victor. And do I need to state anything else?
Your address.
My address. I live on 103 Princeton Avenue in the Elmwood neighborhood.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you. So I want to just applaud you for the work you're doing, because it's big. It's very, very big. And I kind of wish, I'm kind of envious, because I'd like to be up at the table with you to hash this all out. But I'm not, so I'm standing before you. So with the redistricting committee's work, we have once in a decade opportunity to correct some historical wrongs in our city and expedite a measurable measure of fairness and equity across all the neighborhoods. So when I look at the criteria for rewarding, and I see that there are the 6, and equality of population is the first bullet. Does that imply that that is the priority? That is the first thing that people are looking at, that you need to look at? Or are all of these criteria equally as important? And I state that because under communities of interest, it says geographic integrity respected so as to minimize division of neighborhoods or other areas of interest. If I look at the map of the neighborhoods in Providence, and I look at South Providence, there's a line between what is now called Upper and Lower South Providence. And where did that come from? And are they two distinct neighborhoods? I don't think so. I think if you ask the people in South Providence, it's South Providence. It's not Upper South Providence and Lower South Providence. So who are we listening to? And what are the consequences of who we're listening to and not listening to? So I just want to speak to a couple things, a couple appeals. To appeal to the committee to take into consideration the historical legacies that we all live under, especially in the more marginalized neighborhoods in Providence. Power, privilege, whiteness, money. Who does keeping the Elmwood neighborhood and the South Providence neighborhood both not integrated into one ward as a whole integrated neighborhood? Each neighborhood is divided between 2 wards. Who has this benefited historically? And who has it served to marginalize? I think these are really critical questions that need to be answered. And my second appeal is there's an opportunity here to turn it around. There's an opportunity here to not just do the same thing that has been done each time this redistricting has come up, which keeps the same systems going, which keeps certain neighborhoods behind. Not fair. Sorry. This issue of ward redistricting is deep. And it's unfortunate that this work has to be done in a short period of time. I believe the city charter needs to be reviewed so that all neighborhoods can have integrity and be kept together. Does that mean that there needs to be a different amount of wards in the city besides 15? And just because we have had 15, that does not mean that that is the best way to move forward. Well, the wheels are turning. And I appeal to you that this process is more than just a numbers game. It is not just about the statistics that come forward. Your criteria, I think, state that. And you're bound to these criteria. I appeal to you. I appeal to you to not to have this be a numbers game where you're just moving 300 people from this ward to 400 people to that ward, 200 people, and shifting a little bit. A deeper treatment, if you will, needs to be had. And I use that word treatment because I think the disequities in our city create disease. And they create a lot of social ills and a lot of marginalization. And who does it all benefit? Who are you working for? Are you working for those of us who are taxpayers and residents in the city? Or are you working for somebody else? This committee, I believe this committee is not a puppet to anybody and needs not be. And I appreciate the transparency that you've brought forward. And I appreciate the fact that we have lay people, non-elected officials like myself on this committee. Thank you very much.
To have any response to your thank you, Doug. The only response I'll say is that the committee did spend some time discussing the criteria, and we actually had the same question as you. Is this list supposed to be ordered? And it's of our opinion that it is not. That depending on the things that we have to work with, the clay that we have to mold, that we were another dependent upon the things that we have to take into consideration. So I just wanted to let you know that had been discussed and that is written in our guiding principles document.
Thank you.
Next on the list, I have Gemini Rivera.
Is this okay?
Yes. Just state your name and address for the record.
Sure. Gemini Rivera, 326 Dudley Street in South Providence.
Thank you.
I first want to echo a lot of the sentiments that Doug has expressed. I also want to say thank you for this. I walked in here not knowing what redistricting was, and I'm thinking this is a great cliff notes, right? that I'm going to need to really explore. But my thoughts are, as I was looking at a lot of these graphs, I'm thinking, how can we not clearly see that there's a racial divide in this city? And how have we allowed that for so long? I'm specifically speaking about the South South Providence. I'm a recently new resident, 2 years, and I can't help but think as I walked around and trying to understand my current neighborhood, how undervalued and how the lack of respect I feel like the neighborhood has and the residents there. So I thank you for explaining some of this and keep thinking as population grows, how much of that was individual choice versus systemic implementation? And so what I mean by that is we have new structures coming into the south side that none of the residents are really looking forward to, but will impact the population of that area, which then will impact redistricting. How is that being considered when you start this process or when you actually execute to it? Considering Crossroads is now going to build a 5-story unit with about 178 new apartments coming in. Those residents will have impact in regards to the population. We have Barbara Jordan too, which is now the Joseph Caffrey Apartments, which is also subsidized housing coming in maybe 2 blocks away from that. And we have a new recent development coming into the Flint neighborhood near the hospital. And that's going to impact it within not even a mile radius, right? Yet all of the residents, current residents in the area are opposed to all of these things. So I'm wondering, how are we considering that when this is happening? And how are those, as we redistrict, how are those new lines going to be drawn and who's going to be impacted the most? And how are we going to address this to a neighborhood that does not feel like they have a say at all, which is what is currently happening? So I want to highlight South Providence has been expected to adapt to change that they're not ready for or that they don't want. How are we going to, so my questions are, how can we see these graphs, look at this to only inform redistricting, but how can we take it to a state level and say, how are you all allowing this in a small area or in regards to other wards in other areas? And I think we understood as we move forward in this. I live in South Providence, I'm 26 Dudley. So, the points I wanted to make was, as a.
I'm sorry, could you just say your name for the
Oh, I'm
record?
Jadera Rivera.
Deborah?
Jadera.
Jadira, thank you.
It was close. And we are twins. Yes. Everyone's like, why is she here again? So my question, I guess, as discoveries are made in regards to the growth in certain districts, will you take that further and understand why there is growth and share that with the people? Will you also share specific streets and areas that will transition into new wards and why? How is that going to be selected or determined? As someone who values transparency, I think it's important to understand why decisions that are going to be, that we're going to be impacted by are being made. And so I wonder if there's going to be space to allow for people to process, to understand why the decisions are being made, and then to reconvene again to discuss further.
Thank you, Jadira. So I'll give just a brief overview of the timeline for you. We have 2 more public hearings. One is the 28th, which is next Monday. That's at Da Vinci Center. And then we have one on the 2nd, and that's a Zoom meeting. We expect next week that we will have our first set of maps made public.
Next week?
Next week. Next week. And that's our hope, that's our expectation. And so there'll be time for folks to review those and respond to them. Then our committee has our decisions to make, which is March 8th. We'll have our committee meeting in which we vote a single map out to the city council. And then what happens then is there'll be several weeks of time. I believe it's March 28th or thereabouts. So near the end of March will be the city council's public hearing on the map, in which people will again be able to come forward and give their input. And then the city council will have to have 2 meetings several days apart, and they have to vote twice on the final map. So we won't, there's essentially another month of time in between now and then. And the reason why we have that short timeline is because after we redraw our maps, then we need to draw the precincts. And the precincts need to be drawn in time to then enable people to register to vote in the districts in which they will run. And that is also timeline guided by the state. And so we're sort of abutting against those times. So we essentially had on the front end, we had to wait for the state to sort of complete their process. The governor only signed the maps last week on the 16th. The maps are finalized for the state. That's why we started our process early to start gathering data, but we weren't even sure when the maps were going to be signed. And then we have this very short timeline in order to get everyone's input, draw the maps, make some decisions, make some changes perhaps to the maps based on input, and then vote them to the council. So I appreciate it because it has been sort of this, we've known we've had the time on the ends, but the time in the middle has sort of been shifting just based on things that are a little bit out of our immediate control. So I appreciate that ability to let us clarify that. Does anyone have that? Great, okay. Next, Madam Clerk, I have Jeremy Costa.
No.
Mr. Costa, just please state your name and address for the record.
Yeah, I'm just a local entrepreneur.
You have to state your name and your address.
Yeah, my name is Jeremy Costa, and we will say 190 Broad Street. So, Michael, I have a few questions, and I hopefully Ryan and Kimball and everybody that you're from Electric Data Services. Okay, so you were on the commission to aggregate all this data from the census that was gathered in 2020 during the middle of COVID. How do you know that data that you actually received is actually pertinent to the current situation that we have today, since those areas that you aggregated the data from were, on lockdown, were pretty much shut down. There were people that were doing polling. In the middle of COVID, a lot of people didn't go out for months since, the beginning of that year. My other question is, how do you determine a 2-year window of time frame to, like, where did you get the matrix to determine a 2-year window was going to be enough to compensate the statutes for the state legislative, making sure that it was one domicile, one vote. So I was just trying to figure out why the 2 years window and not a 10-year window, since that's the next time that this information will go in front of a review board where you'll actually be able to get $690,000 to abstract this information that pretty much really doesn't benefit the community at all, besides the fact that I have here, I see here that, we have a lot of infrastructure that's coming into the South Providence area. We have probably 7 to 20 different projects that are going on. We have the commission is actually looking for all the abandoned buildings. We could just take you down Robinson, Harris, Harold, Harvard. We could take you to Clowntown. We could take you to all the depleted areas that have no residency, that haven't had residents during the time that they were actually trying to aggregate the data to find out who was living in the process in those properties. So we have an issue that that data that you have selected and all this information that you're trying to bulldoze this information, and it's not correct. It's not correct. So I think that it needs to be re-audited. I think that there needs to be a separate commission. You were hired by the state and you failed to do your job. Why did the city hire you to do the same job that you weren't able to complete for the state in regards to prison gerrymandering? I don't understand how you guys are continuing to be hired as an allocated expert on this stuff when you guys weren't able to do the first job on the prison gerrymandering. Like, I don't know, but hopefully we can get to the bottom of that, because we have a lot of people that are going to be leaving this, these facilities in Cranston, but the people that are running Cranston, that get all the incentive, to get all the resources, get all the businesses that come out there because they have nobody that's abetting their properties, they're getting all those resources, and for 10 more years, you had your guy Kimball say, that's a next decade issue. That's an issue. The fact that he wants to think about something to deal with the community now and 10 years from now. We need to deal with these issues now. And I don't think that you guys are qualified to be able to handle this if you weren't able to do it for the state and get what we need to get. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Jeremy. One thing I'll say is that we are required to use census data as it is given to us on April 1st of 2020. That's the census day. And so while we understand that change is constantly happening in the city, there's always new buildings going up, there's always people moving in and out. We are required to use that April 1st, 2020 census count when we're redrawing these wards. Next, I have Wayne Woods. Thank you, Wayne.
How you doing? My name is Wayne Woods. I live at 124 Moore Street. That's Ward 11. And I'm gonna try to keep this as short as possible. And I agree with a lot of what everybody's saying here. In my opinion, these numbers are not accurate, and it's not in the best interest of people of color that look like me. That's why a lot of my people don't trust the census, because it's never in our best interest. We're always excluded from this. So how do we know these numbers are accurate? And how come this information is not put out to the community, especially people in my community, people that look like me, that have access to this information, so they can be, so you can have these seats more filled with people that look like me and give their opinion. So we don't trust the Census Bureau because we know it's never in our best interest, and we're always excluded out for that. And I know these numbers are not accurate, so I don't trust it, and I know my people don't either. So how can we trust something that you said from 2010 to 2020? I seen that where the graphic said that there were more Hispanics than are Black. I live in Ward 11. There's just as many Blacks as there are Hispanics. You know these numbers are not accurate. Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. Next, I have Michelle Davis. Good evening, Michelle.
I'm Michelle Francis Davis, and I'm a resident of Mount Hope. I agree with Doug and his statements, and I'm just wondering, I have a question. Located in Ward 3, what currently Mount Hope is related and seen as Ward 6. I'm wondering why that is. We're smack in the middle of the east side. Mount Hope's demographics: 44.5% non-Hispanic white, 29.4% African-American, and 10.4% Hispanic. Now, as we know, Providence has a long history of segregation. Okay, 1950s and during the period that Route 195 and 95, the two highways cut through the city of Providence, which basically cut off the south side, west end, and it isolated the already marginalized communities of color. to the west and south of the highway. The neighborhoods are predominantly low-income Hispanic and people of color. Okay, Providence used the transportation infrastructure to reinforce segregation, and these divisions still remain to this day. In addition to the highway construction, discriminatory lending practices have been upheld through the city, segregated neighborhoods dated back to several decades. Okay, to include banks. For example, Santander, they settled in, I believe it's 2013 for $1.3 million for segregation, or I'm sorry, discriminatory practices. Okay, 2014, an article by the Providence Journal also says that neighborhoods and low-level home ownership among residents of color, as pointed out in the 2014 article in the Providence Journal, according to, this is from 2010 to 2014, community survey data, only 24% of Hispanic residents and 32% of Black residents in Providence own homes compared to 44% of white residents. Okay, I'm sorry, that lawsuit was in 2014, Santander, a $1.3 million settlement and lawsuit alleging the bank since 2009 had decreased lending in Providence's minority neighborhoods while simultaneously expanding loans to the white neighborhoods. Okay, fifth largest income, this Providence is the fifth largest income inequity gap among all US cities. Okay, so this research is ongoing. The gap in the wealth also has racial dimension. According to the American Community Survey, the data analyzed by the Providence Journal in 2013, you can look that up. After decades of discriminatory practices like redlining and physical separation through infrastructure, combating inequities within Providence and other cities presented difficulties as they become heavily integrated with certain neighborhoods. However, developing the link with the land, the wealthy east side and mostly lower income South Providence and central downtown are just kind of skipped over. And I say this, well, I didn't quite finish it, but two facets of Providence: expanding education and part of the city into the district, while once again excluding the other half of the city's population. The potential for an integrated neighborhood still remains, and they say that by prioritizing activities including low-income residents into new districts, whether through mixed income, through housing otherwise, or otherwise. I guess the redistricting is the otherwise. I have a challenge because Mount Hope neighborhood is in Ward 3, but we're considered Ward 6. And with the demographics that I just read, I don't see how Mount Hope is singled out to be associated and over on another side of town, which would be Onlyville, which is Ward 6. I'm not understanding that. So can someone give me an answer for that? And these are discriminatory practices still in the great state of Rhode Island, which I was born and raised in. I had the unfortunate part of actually going down south and seeing stuff there, but Rhode Island, we need to develop a better system that people of all color are provided the same equal treatment and financial stability along with voting rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And Sam is going to chat with you. Okay. Next on the list, I have Councilor LaFortune.
Hello, thank you, Chair and committee members. Thank you for taking the time to host these various community meetings and engage in the community and get input. I won't be long because many of my concerns were already spoken of from some of the residents here. And I'm Miracle of Fortune, Councilwoman, Ward 3. My address is 4 Greek Drive. Providence, Rhode Island. So my biggest concern is representation and really thinking about not just Mount Hope in particular, but a lot of the marginalized communities. And if we think, and if we look at it from a historical lens, those are communities that continue to be disenfranchised and shifted. Because when we look at population shifts, we also need to look at the demographics of those population shifts. And when we look at a community, for example, as Mount Hope, where historically was one of the most populated Black communities in the country, and to now see the shift in population, and also just even taking a step backwards, how Mount Hope was created was because of the displacement of Black people in the city of Providence. It's really important that communities of color in Providence have representation to be able to advocate for their needs and to ensure that they are protected and valued. And just thinking about, I'm so sorry, I forgot your name.
Oh, Gemini.
Gemini and her sister and what they shared about what is happening in the Southside community. As so many people know, I grew up in the Southside community. My parents have been in the same house in the Southside community for over 31 years. In total, my family has lived in the Southside community since we came West End and then Southside when we first came to America. And to see what those neighborhoods were then in the early 1980s to what the neighborhoods are now, it looks completely different. And we see how it also has impact Black communities, communities of color economically, quite significantly. So I think as we look at the drawing the lines for the redistricting, is really important to think about how this is going to impact the residents, not only impact them in terms of who's going to represent them, but that representation also associates with housing, associates with economic progress, associates with education, associates with healthcare, associates with environmental justice. So I appreciate that you all are taking the time to speak with us, but I do hope that at the state level, you are able to truly bring our concerns to the table and that they listen, because if not, we're going to further harm communities of color. I mean, just a few years ago, the Economic Institute came out and said, with a report and said, Rhode Island is one of the worst states for Black families. And it continues to be one of the worst states for Black families. And so I do hope that all those things are taken into consideration and we value all neighborhoods and treat them equitably in terms of how we determine what district they will fall in. I apologize. So thank you, and thank you everyone for being here.
Thank you, Councilwoman, very much. Next, I have Helen Baskerville-Dukes.
Hi, my name is Helen Baskerville-Dukes. I live on Camp Street, Ward 3.
Welcome home.
Mount Hope. I just had a couple of questions. So first of all, I heard about this meeting around 2 o'clock, which is awful. Because residents were calling me, asking me questions like, why are they renaming Mount Hope? Yeah, I know. Calling, putting us combining us with West End, so we'll be called West End. And I assured them I didn't think that was the fact. Also, why are we being shifted and combined with West End? Why are they taking us out of East Side? I don't know. I'm just telling you what people are saying. I don't think that's the case. But as Mount Hope, being where we are and who we are, probably like the black sheep of the East Side. But through gentrification and all these things that are happening, I can't understand why the numbers are low. But we do know historically, Black people are apprehensive about the census. I just think that should be another way of gaining access about the members in the community. We know that there has been a huge shift with the Mount Hope neighborhood, just cleaning us out. Meaning in terms of opportunities and housing, there's families that cannot go back, live there or afford to live there. So I just want to make sure that, Mount Hope it doesn't change shape. We stay together as a community. I just want to assure the residents that do call me that you guys are going to consider the implications of putting us somewhere where that politically we will lose power in terms of the things that we need to be advocated for in our communities, and all the other things they said, especially that. That's what I have to say.
Thank you, Helen. That is all that's on my list, but is there anyone here who didn't add their name who would like to come up and provide testimony this evening? Anyone? Might be on the edge of your seat thinking, yes, maybe. I've been there before, so I know the feeling.
Just think, one is to really highlight and drive. There's a lot of people who have trauma based off of what happened 10 years ago. This is an opportunity to change it, and to really collaborate with the communities that have suffered greatly as a result of this practice. It really is, and I just really want to drive that home. Like, please really listen and take into account and collaborate with the community, the ones that are going to suffer the most as a result of this practice.
Thank you, Jadira. Well, hearing nothing else, Madam Clerk, I'd like to call the meeting to close. Counselors, do you have anything to add?
No, just repeat starting next meeting.
Yes, please. Yeah.
The amount of presence or the amount of people that's at a public meeting, does that determine if it's actually a public meeting or not? Is there like a specific roll call or number that,
No.
or you just have to list it and have the public meetings?
Correct. We list the public meetings to invite the public to come and speak.
Gotta spread the word though.
So our next meeting is next Monday at the Da Vinci Center on Charles Street. All are welcome. Please spread the word to your friends or family, your neighbors. After that, on Wednesday, March 2nd, we have a Zoom meeting. Again, everyone is welcome. And there will be on the agenda a link to sign up to provide testimony virtually, since it is a virtually only meeting. We also have a hybrid committee meeting this Thursday at 5:30. Which is on the Secretary of State's website listed. The agenda has been posted. And that is also a public meeting, and folks are welcome to join us there as well. And there is also room for public comment on that agenda. So thank you very much all. We really appreciate you coming out tonight, being with us on this journey. We know it's short and tight, but we really do appreciate everyone's effort and all of the comments and testimony everyone has provided this evening and in the previous session. So thank you very much. everyone here and also everyone watching us via Zoom and YouTube. Thank you.